Welcome to the Private School Leader Podcast, where private school leaders learn how to thrive and not just survive as they serve and lead their schools. I strongly believe that it is possible to have a long and happy and fulfilling career as a private school leader. And my passion is to help you figure out exactly how to do just that, right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And I'm your host, Mark Minkus. So I want to tell you about the most discouraging day of my school year. And over my career, especially over the last 10 or 12 years, I would say that it was pretty predictable as to which day of the year was going to be my most discouraging day. And I'll come back to that in a moment because, my most stressful day, if we want to talk about that, that kind of changes and it's situational and it usually involves a really upset parent. And then that parent, it's complex because they're a teacher or they are a big donor or it's a board member's kid. That would be my most stressful day of the year. And then, what about my worst day of the year? Well, again, that's situational because, it usually involves a tragedy or just something, terrible, the worst thing that happened that school year. And so that's unpredictable. What is predictable is my best day of the year, which is usually the day of the 8th grade versus faculty basketball game that is on a Friday afternoon and it concludes Spirit Week. And, it's a lot of fun, a lot of school spirit. And if I had to say my most rewarding day of the school year, that's easy. Our school goes up to 8th grade, and so 8th grade graduation, and you get to see those kids graduate, and, you had a front row seat for that transformation that took place. And for me, that's the most rewarding day. But what about my most discouraging day? Why is that so predictable? Well, my most discouraging day is the day that I get the results of the parent survey. And the reason for that is because, you work so hard, only you know the price that you pay to be a private school leader. And then you have to get feedback, but then you get that feedback and the numbers don't reflect what you think is the version of reality at your school. And honestly, there were days when I would get the parent survey results and, at best, I felt like I need to leave and go home, or I don't think I'm coming in tomorrow. That's at best. At worst, sometimes you just feel like I'm not sure I'm cut out to do this. I'm not sure I want to do this anymore. And it's so powerful, it's so discouraging, and it's just so big. The emotions are so big surrounding receiving the results of the parent survey. At least they have been for me, and certainly for a lot of my coaching clients when I talk to them. And so what are we going to do about this? Well, on today's episode of the Private School Leader Podcast, we are going to discuss how to navigate complex emotions when you get the parent survey results. But before we do that, I have another question for you. And that is, what is the name of the parent that's living rent-free in your head right now? What is the name of the parent that's living rent-free in your head right now? Well, I've been there, and I used to have parents living rent-free in my head 24/7 when I was trying to fall asleep, or when I'm at the dinner table with my family, or trying to drive to work, or trying to take a shower, just anything, and they're living rent-free in my head. And I used to get, super anxious and sick to my stomach just thinking about talking to certain parents. And parent issues used to dominate every aspect of my work as a private school leader, and I was stressed out all the time, and I didn't know what to do, and I didn't have a plan, and I had a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear and a lot of insecurity. Well, maybe I'm also describing how you feel some of the time. Well, this is why I created Parent Academy, is because I used to feel this way. but I want you to have a plan, because over 33 years as a private school leader, I worked with thousands of parents, and I built Parent Academy to help you to have a plan and to have a framework, a step-by-step framework for building effective partnerships with parents while reducing your stress and anxiety. And I really believe that with Parent Academy, you can go from feeling anxious and stressed out about working with parents to feeling confident and calm. And that's what I want for you. I want you to feel confident and calm instead of anxious and stressed out. And I think you need a plan. And so I would like for you to go to theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy and check it out. In addition to 4 modules there for you, there are 2 plug-and-play PDs for your teachers. Because I know sometimes I've talked to private school leaders and they're like, yeah, this is all great that I know this, but I wish my teachers knew this. Well, now we can check that box, because I've got 2 45-minute webinars. They would have guided notes with discussion questions, and this is something that could be a game changer for you and for your teachers. So like I said, Parent Academy, check it out over at theprivateschoolleader.com/Parent Academy. And also, I just want to say thank you for listening to the podcast by giving you a free resource. And this is called The 6 Things That Every Private School Teacher Wants from Their Leader. And this guide is a 6-page PDF that I think can be a real game changer for you. And I guarantee that if you do these 6 things, the teachers at your school will be happy to follow you. And so you can pick up your free guide, The 6 Things That Every Private School Teacher Wants from Their Leader, by just going to theprivateschoolleader.com/guide, and that's free for you, just as a thank you for listening to the podcast. All right. So we're talking about how to navigate complex emotions when you get the parent survey results. And I want to break this down into 2 parts. The first one is I want to give you 5 reasons why receiving parent survey results causes complex emotions for you. Give you 5 reasons. And then I want to take the 5 stages of grief and apply them to you getting the parent survey results. And I know that that might sound a little dramatic, a little over the top, but I want you to stick around, because I'm going to show you that this isn't overly dramatic and it isn't over the top. And actually, the 5 stages of grief can be super helpful with regards to being a framework for you when it comes to you receiving the parent survey results and having a framework to navigate those really, really complex feelings. So first of all, why do we get big feelings when we get the parent survey results? Well, reason number one is fear of negative feedback. So I don't know about you, but I don't like getting negative feedback. You know, even 33 years into a career of private school leadership, I mean, I have an ego and I have, certain expectations about my performance and also the results. And when the feedback that I get about the job that I'm doing doesn't match what I think is happening, it's hard. And, when you send out that parent survey, or for that matter, we'll talk about when you send out a staff survey, a teacher survey, you don't know what you're going to get. And so there's a fear. And, those survey results can reflect dissatisfaction. The scores can go down. The parent satisfaction scores can go down. And, we fear criticism because it feels intensely personal. That negative feedback feels intensely personal. And I think one of the reasons that it feels so personal is because, well, number one, it is personal. But number two, you work so hard and you sacrifice so much for the kids and your teachers and the parents and the board. And then you ask, how are we doing? And you get the answers. And, maybe I'm talking to some leaders that your parent survey results are great and they're great every year. and you look forward to getting that feedback. I guess there's been some years where I was pretty excited about the feedback because, we improved in a lot of areas. But it is difficult to overcome that fear of negative feedback. Okay, so that's reason number one. Reason number two that we have big emotions surrounding the parent survey results sometimes is because it's an overwhelming amount of information. It's an overwhelming amount of information. And so I was lucky enough that at my most recent school that there was someone on the PR and marketing and communications team that it was her responsibility to take all of the data, the survey results, and to put them into a report. And depending on the quality of the tool that you use for the survey, when you're gathering that information, sometimes you have a very good process and you get a high participation rate, and it also does a lot of the work for you. But my point is that I was lucky enough for about 10 years that I wasn't the one tallying up all the numbers. But for about 20 years, I was that person. And so it's like a double whammy. It's not just that you're getting the feedback, but it's also that you have this overwhelming amount of feedback. And sometimes just the sheer volume of that can be paralyzing. It's like paralysis, it's analysis paralysis. And so, let's say the size of your school that you're getting dozens or probably maybe even hundreds of responses. And just the task of making sense of it all just feels really, really daunting and overwhelming. What's actionable? What's just noise? What should I listen to? What should I tune out? And so reason number two is the overwhelming amount of information. And the reason number three that we sometimes get emotional about parent survey results is because of the emotional disconnect. So let me explain what I mean by this. So surveys most often are anonymous. And so I think that that's important to get honest feedback, but it also creates some emotional detachment. And for me, at least, it's created a lot of cognitive dissonance when it comes to these nameless, faceless, shapeless individuals that are giving me feedback rather than the warm community that I've poured myself into and bent over backwards and had really difficult meetings and did all the hard things and serve. When we serve and lead, we're serving and leading human beings. But when we get the survey results, we're getting numbers and we're getting some open-ended comments and we don't know who they're from. And so what we do is emotional work, and we are in that lane a lot. But then all of a sudden, the judgment, the feedback, the survey results, there can be a disconnect or a cognitive dissonance because it's anonymous. You don't know who is feeling this way, who's giving this feedback. So that's reason number three. And then reason number four, and I think this is one of the strongest, reason number four why we sometimes have big emotions surrounding the parent survey results is negativity bias. So that negativity bias is a cognitive bias that causes us to process negative information more than positive information, and that we are more likely to notice and remember negative events and insults than we are compliments or happy memories or good things, okay? So if I asked you to stop and think about something really awesome that happened to you when you were in middle school, or I asked you to stop and think and tell me something embarrassing or really, really awful that happened in middle school, most people, it's going to be very, very easy to remember the negative thing, and it's going to take a while to try and drill down into those memories and remember what was the really awesome positive thing that happened in middle school. And so an example of this, and I've mentioned this before on the podcast, I remember probably about 5 years ago or so, maybe a few more years than that. But anyways, it was parent-teacher conferences, and it was a Thursday evening and a Friday morning. And then Friday at noon, the teachers were done. So let's say it was Thursday from like 4 to 7:30, and then Friday morning from like 8 to noon. And I didn't know about this. I was trying to check in with all the teachers, but one of my middle school math teachers, over the course of those, whatever I just named, 8 hours or so, if you have 10 or 15 minute conferences, you can have a lot of conferences. And I want to say that she had like 41 different parents that she met with during that time. And I was talking to her on Monday morning, and I could tell she was kind of down in the dumps. And she's like, and so I asked her what was wrong, and she named the parent and said, we had a really bad, conference, and just, was just kind of going after me and didn't appreciate this or that and didn't agree with me on this and making a lot of excuses for the kids and just really being critical of my teaching style, so on and so forth. Okay. And I said, well, how many did you have altogether? And we looked, and I think it was 41. And so my point is this. She had 40 parent conferences that actually went really, really well, and had one that didn't. And she literally spent the whole weekend thinking about it and having a difficult time sleeping because of that one conference. And so that negativity bias is so strong. And so that's hard for us when we're looking at parent survey results to not focus on just the negative, to not focus on a balanced approach, even if there are positive comments, but we overemphasize the negative feedback because of negativity bias. And then the fifth reason why sometimes we have big emotions around receiving parent survey results is the concern about how others will perceive the results. And for me, this is a big one because there's all this pressure about how's the board going to take these numbers? How will the staff take these numbers when I have to share them with the staff? The teachers pour themselves into these kids too, and they're going to feel a certain way if the numbers have dropped. The parent satisfaction numbers or specific numbers about, the teachers and whatnot. And so, there's probably worry or concern about how these results are going to reflect on you as a leader and the school's reputation. And then, I don't know about you, but then it's easy to catastrophize and just be like, okay, well, man, am I going to lose my job? Or, this is really going to hurt retention, and then that's going to hurt the budget, and so on and so forth. And, it's super valid just having concerns about how other people are going to perceive the results, especially people who aren't in the school every single day, like the board. So those are the 5 reasons why we sometimes deal with big emotions around the parent survey results. And now I want to walk you through the 5 stages of grief, how they apply to parent survey results, and how this can actually be a helpful framework for you to kind of keep those emotions in check. So we've all learned about the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. And I really don't think I'm being overly dramatic to say that we can apply the 5 stages of grief to parent survey results, because here's the thing. I did an episode a while back as far as like how to lead while you're dealing with grief, and kind of shared my experience of how I had 3 sisters pass away in 3 consecutive years. And so I think that sometimes we think that the 5 stages of grief is only reserved for when someone dies. But the definition of grief is emotional response to a significant loss. Now, it's mostly and most often applied to grief over a loved one or a friend that passes away, but it's loss. And so that could be a major life change. It could be becoming empty nesters. It could be a career change or a big dream that you had, and now that's not going to happen. So loss, an emotional response to a significant loss. And so let's face it, receiving these survey results sometimes can feel like a loss of control. It can feel like you're you thought the school was going in this direction, and then you're just all over the place because you're like, wait a second, this does not match up with what I thought was going on in front of my eyes this year. But just that idea of what you thought it was going to be, what you thought it was, and all the hard work you put in to earn where you are in the school year. And then if the survey results don't match that, and especially if they really don't match that, I think we feel some grief. We feel loss. And so let's talk about it. So first of all, and one last thing on this, two things real quick here. So I've noticed that for me, these feelings are a lot worse when it's a survey of my teachers and my staff about how I'm doing. Of course they're asking other questions, but when it's an internal survey, I mean, it's hard enough when you get the feedback from the parents and there's a question on there about bullying and you have pulled out all the stops and you really thought that things were in better shape, and then the number goes down as far as their satisfaction. But I've found that it's even worse when you're asking the teachers. And this was especially true the year after COVID. I know for myself and our head of lower school, and again, teachers were really compromised and we were all going through a traumatic experience, but we did so much, and then I remember the numbers were pretty low as far as like, do you feel supported by your division head? And that was really hard. But the second thing, and the last thing on this before we just go through them quickly, is give yourself the permission to go through the 5 stages. Grief is not only reserved for when someone passes away. It can be applied to other feelings of loss as well. All right, so give yourself the permission to go through the 5 stages of grief. All right, stage 1, denial. So you get the survey results, and I don't know about you, but I'm just like, oh, this can't be right. These numbers have to be wrong. These results, these numbers, they don't reflect the reality. This is crazy. And then you start digging in and you're like, oh, well, only this certain percentage of parents responded. And well, of course, people who are happy aren't going to respond to the survey, only the parents who are upset. And, and if only the parents who are upset respond, then the numbers are going to be skewed. And, this doesn't reflect reality, and so on and so on and so on. Okay, we're in denial. And when that happens, we might just dismiss the feedback out of hand, or even just feel the urge to ignore parts of it. And here's the thing, denial is a defense mechanism that helps us protect us from pain. Our brain is trying to protect us from pain, and denial helps us avoid uncomfortable truths. We have denial in parts of our life if our relationship isn't going well with, our spouse or partner, or if there's something going on with our finances that we're in denial about. We stay in denial, we can avoid the uncomfortable truth. And so denial sometimes is a much more comfortable place to be than to deal with the thing. Most of the time that's true. But as leaders, we have to move past this denial stage. And so again, I think it's important to go through it, to sit with it, to experience those emotions, and to just be in denial for a little while. It's like back when I did that episode on the August apology, when you have someone 2 days before the first day of school that resigns and takes a job in the public school, I told you, have a pity party first. Like, get it out of your system. So I think denial is okay. I think denial is a good thing. So it's natural, but we don't want to let it hold us back. So a couple of pieces of practical advice, just sit in it for a bit, go into denial, but give yourself permission that you're going to be in denial for a little bit, but then you're going to face this feedback. And then don't just try and address all the feedback. Just pick like one area and take like one small step towards processing it. And I'm not even saying responding to it or building a plan. I'm just like processing your emotions about that feedback. And sometimes the most important step is to just take the time to read through all the results carefully rather than just rushing to the open-ended comments, and to just carefully read through them and to just kind of like let those emotions happen. So it's certainly been true for me. Maybe this is resonating with you. Stage 1 is denial. All right, then stage 2 of the 5 stages of grief is anger. So once I get through my denial about, well, these numbers can't be right, and it was only the upset parents that responded, then I get angry about it. And I get upset when I see that negative feedback, and I think to myself, they have no idea how hard I'm working. And I think this is unfair. And I think no good deed goes unpunished. And I think, what is the point? And anger is a powerful emotion, but can also cloud our judgment and completely slam the brakes on any progress for our school. But we have to get past the denial and past the anger if we're going to do something with these survey results. But it's normal for us to feel these emotions. I say this all the time to my coaching clients. What we do is emotional work, and being high in emotional intelligence is a blessing and a curse. It's a blessing most of the time. But then when it comes to us, and we're empathic and we are, high in emotional intelligence, well, then of course we're going to feel things in a big way. If we're completely like a robot and unfeeling, I mean, maybe that helps us out when we get the survey results, but that's certainly not going to help us out on a day-to-day basis doing our job. And so it's the other side of that coin of being high in emotional intelligence. And so just a couple of pieces of advice. When we're in that anger, it's okay to have that feeling. It's normal. But then try to become an observer of the situation. That's helped me a lot, where I try to be an observer of the situation instead of a participant, instead of just having my emotions run wild. And, I think sometimes about my emotions and that amygdala hijack, and I think about, well, who's driving the bus? Am I driving the bus, or am I sitting in the 8th row and my emotions are driving the bus? And there are going to be different times, especially the day you get them and the day after you get the parent survey results, perhaps, that emotions are going to be driving the bus. But we need to keep moving our way up the aisle from row 8 to row 6 to row 2 back to the driver's seat and drive the bus, okay? One of the ways we can do that is regulating your autonomic nervous system. I'll link that in the show notes at theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 122. The episode I did on that and gave some tools about regulating your autonomic nervous system. Try as much as you can to view things through the lens that this is data, and that data is not a personal attack. These are answers to questions. And of course, people might have an agenda or whatever, all the things that we could say during the denial stage. But feedback is data. And these are numbers on a page. These are numbers on a screen. Okay, that's helpful sometimes. And then talk to somebody that you can vent to, whether that's your spouse or another colleague. And then once you get through, sometimes I've found that it's helpful to kind of go through a couple of these stages with someone else, and then, start getting constructive about it. Okay, and then stage 3 is bargaining. So we go from denial to anger to bargaining. And with bargaining, we might be like, well, if I could just fix this one area, maybe I could make the parents happy again. And if I improve this, then maybe they'll overlook everything else because this thing over here is really shiny and they seem to be upset about that, when really my priorities are the curriculum and their priorities are the new basketball uniforms, that kind of stuff. And we just think, well, if I could just blank, or if I could just, that's bargaining. And so I think that in that phase, at least I'll speak for myself, that sometimes I jump too quick into trying to make changes before I fully understand the root causes. Because let's face it, the feedback that we get, there are root causes for that feedback, and we may never know them, but we owe it to our school, and quite frankly, we owe it to ourselves, to not make a bunch of empty promises or knee-jerk reactions or jump into changing stuff and let the tail wag the dog, the tail being the parent survey results and the dog being the entire school organization. And again, to just recognize where we are and to not do anything hasty, okay? And so that's my first piece of advice when we talk about stage 3 bargaining is that don't rush into quick fixes. Just take a step back and ask, what are some themes? What are the patterns in the feedback? And then just try to focus on not big changes, but sustainable changes. I'm a big believer in small changes that are sustainable multiplied by time rather than big changes that tend to kind of fall apart. So think about it as a system or a classroom procedure that's repeated over and over and over again versus like a New Year's resolution or quitting smoking cold turkey. You know how those usually go, okay? And so when it comes to the parent survey, let's focus on what can we do that's going to be a sustainable change that can make a real impact over time and not try to please everybody all at once. Because that's what happens with bargaining is we're trying to please everybody immediately, okay? We're focused on the long-term benefit and what's sustainable. And then we get to stage 4, which is depression. And I want to tweak that and say discouragement. I told you at the top of the episode that this is one of the most discouraging days of my school year. At least it has been in several of the years when I get the parent survey results. And so I'm very careful about that word depression because depression and anxiety are real things and they're chronic conditions, they're medical conditions. And so I'm not saying that you won't get depressed from the parent survey results, but I think it's more likely that the D maybe could stand for discouragement, and maybe intense discouragement. But at this stage, you're just going to feel defeated. You might feel like, well, I'm just not cut out for this. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm never going to make people happy. Again, no good deed goes unpunished. I've been working so hard and I've been trying, and this is so freaking discouraging. It feels overwhelming, and just the weight of that feedback feels overwhelming and intensely discouraging. And so there you sit. You're in that low spot. You've gone through the denial, you've gone through the anger, you've gone through the bargaining, and now you're just sitting in that discouragement and overwhelm. What the heck do you do now? Well, a couple things. I think self-compassion is super important right now, and I know that that's the least likely thing that we are to do. But I want you to think about, let's say it's a second grade teacher, and let's say she is in her first year of teaching, but very eager, very coachable, very good attitude, hard worker, but she's struggling with classroom management partway through the year, okay? And you're going to pull that teacher in and you're going to talk to her and try and help her and coach her up and support her with the classroom management. I want you to think about how you're going to talk to her. The tone of voice and the style, the way, the body language, all of those kinds of things. And then I want to ask you if that's the way you're going to talk to yourself the day that you get the parent survey results. Something tells me, and I'll speak from experience, we're going to be way harder on ourselves than we are on that novice teacher who needs support. We're not perfect. We're not robots. Even robots and computer programs make mistakes. So we have to remember that. And one way to remember that, and I'm really, really, really going to emphasize this, and it will be mentioned again in your call to action. I'm going to link episode 37 in the show notes, how an annual portfolio will make you a happier and better compensated leader. I just really think that the positive comments Google Doc that you start, that I've talked about many times before, this is the time when you pull it out. This is the thing that's gotten me out of the intense discouragement, is not just going back and reading the positive comments Google Doc from this current school year, but multiple years, and be like, okay, here's evidence. Because we are stuck, when we're in this discouragement spiral, we are stuck in, if we ask that question, is this a fact or a feeling? Okay, it's hard because these quote-unquote facts, this feedback is staring us in the face, but we got to get past the emotion to get into what are the facts, what is the takeaway from this. But we can't get through those feelings if we feel complete self-loathing and that we're an imposter and that we're completely incompetent at our jobs. And so that's why it's super important to pull up that positive comments Google Doc, or if you have it on a piece of paper, is to pull out that file and to read it and read it and read it and read it, because you do know what you're doing. And then lastly is to just remind yourself that feedback is a tool for growth and not a judgment of your worth. Let me say that one more time. Feedback is a tool for growth and not a judgment of your worth. And boy, don't we manage to link feedback results to our value as a human being and as a leader. And that's not healthy. I did that for years and it got me in a really bad place. And so, and then lastly is to, again, we need support. So whether that's a mentor or a trusted colleague or a friend or a spouse or partner, to just kind of talk through some things with getting past this. And then that brings us to stage 5, which is acceptance. And as we know, this is about coming to terms with the reality of the survey results, with the reality of the situation. And, I didn't like everything I read. You didn't like everything that you read, but I'm ready to put on my big boy pants and to deal with it and to use it to improve, because the kids are worth it. And this is the thing that helps me move past it, is I start focusing on kids. They didn't choose their parents. They didn't choose how loud their parents get or how nasty they can get. These kids are in our school. The kids need us. The kids are worth it. And if we take this feedback and we accept it and we study it and we decide rationally what are the steps that need to be done, then the kids are going to benefit. And remember that feedback is an ongoing process and not a one-time event. And I know, boy, does it feel like a one-time event. It feels like a judge just slammed the gavel down on the thing and up on the bench and said, guilty, guilty as charged. It feels like a judgment. It feels like a one-time event, a moment in time, but feedback is an ongoing process. And so some of those things will help move us off of those emotions and get us into that acceptance, which then moves us to action. And and then sometimes leaders have a bias towards action. Private school leaders in particular have a bias towards action. And so once we've digested, then we're going to create an action plan. Of course, we have to share the survey results with the staff and with the parents and what we're going to do to address it. And we're going to be transparent and we're going to use integrity. We're not going to, only share the good numbers or even cook the books on the numbers. There's a temptation to do that, but there's nothing worth sacrificing your integrity. And that this is just a challenge and an opportunity to move your school in the positive direction. And that's why we're there. That's why we've been entrusted as a leader of our school or of our division. And so we have to take that responsibility and move forward. Is any of this easy? No, I already told you, this is one of the most discouraging days of the year for me. But if we can understand it, maybe we can be a little more effective when we're dealing with it. And so the big takeaways from today's episode, the 5 reasons why we sometimes get emotional when we get the parent survey results. Number 1, fear of negative feedback. Number 2, overwhelming amount of information. Number 3, an emotional disconnect. Number 4, negativity bias. And number 5 is fear about sharing the results. And then we want to allow ourselves to go through the stages of grief. And by the way, they don't always go in this order. They could be out of order and maybe you only go through 3 of them, but I think it's a helpful framework. And of course, that's denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and I substituted the word discouragement for depression, and then acceptance. And so for your call to action, I have one for now and one for later. Now is to start a positive comments Google Doc if you haven't done so already. and later is when you actually get the results of the parent survey, is allow yourself to go through the stages of grief and refer back to this episode, refer back to the show notes, and hopefully navigate this with emotion. Okay, we're not trying to be emotionless, but we're trying to be intentional and just move through these stages instead of getting stuck in anger or denial or bargaining or discouragement for that matter. We want to get to acceptance and then action. So I want to wrap it up by just reminding you one more time about Parent Academy as an online digital course. For you, it's a step-by-step framework for building effective partnerships with the parents at your school and reducing your stress and your anxiety. And as I said at the top, it also comes with 2 45-minute plug-and-play PDs, webinar trainings for your teachers. They get a 27-page printable notebook with guided notes and discussion questions and other resources. And you get a 4-module course that teaches you how to better navigate the situations with parents. But then you also get 2 webinars that are going to train your teachers that you could use on a PD day, or you could even use with individual teachers that are struggling in this area, or in the future for new teachers as part of their onboarding. And you can check all that out over at theprivateschoolleader.com/parentacademy. And then I want to give you another free gift. This one's called How to Use Verbal Judo to Have Better Conversations with the Parents at Your School. And this is a 9-page PDF that takes the idea of verbal judo and applies it to working with parents. And verbal judo is a communication strategy that uses words to de-escalate conflict and resolve disputes. And George Thompson and Jerry Jenkins wrote a book called Verbal Judo, The Gentle Art of Persuasion. And George Thompson has trained over 200,000 law enforcement officers in the United States in the art of verbal judo. And so I took the highlights from that book and then applied it to your role as a private school leader. So that's just a free PDF for you. Check it out at theprivateschoolleader.com/judo. And that's how to use verbal judo to have better conversations with the parents at your school. And, just again, a reminder, theprivateschoolleader.com/episode 122 is where you'll find the show notes for today. And I just would really appreciate it if you ever get value from this podcast, if you have been helped, if you've ever picked up a strategy, if it's ever been a source of encouragement for you, if you would just take the time today and think of a leader that you know, a leader in your life, school leader, maybe someone you met at a conference, and just email them the link for the podcast. And then think about a rising leader at your school. I think you have a good eye for that person that's a rising leader, a rising star. Send them the link to the podcast and let them start to consume the content and learn and grow and be encouraged and maybe be inspired. So I really appreciate it if you would do that. And I've been your host, Mark Minkus. I want to say how much I appreciate you and all the amazing hard work you're doing at your school. Thank you so much for taking some of your precious time to join me here today. And I'll see you next time right here on the Private School Leader Podcast. And until then, always remember to serve first, lead second, and make a difference.